Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome. Access to Democracy back with you. Alan Miller here. I'm confused about that name, but I'll get it straight sooner or later. We have a guest today, Representative Sandy Masin, who has been a guest over her many terms in the Minnesota legislature, and she's now seeking her 6th term.
Exactly.
Running again in the 2018 election. So Sandy, welcome back.
Oh, my pleasure.
District 51A, that is. Mm-hmm. And we're creeping up on a new term. And of course, when we say creepy, we talk about the legislature, but let's not be unkind. What do you anticipate some of the highlights for the new term?
If you're talking about this year or going into 2018, for this year, mainly it's a bonding term. And I think the governor put together a fairly aggressive bonding package. I know that there's some components of the legislature think it's too much, but again, interest rates are still low, and there are so many needs that Minnesota has that we need to do as much as possible. And coming from Dakota County, there's a couple of things that are important. One is the governor has included the money for the landfill, which is really important to Burnsville.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, you had a bill concerning the landfill that passed the last session.
Right.
If I'm not...
And this, it's we have a landfill that has been closed, but there are reports that there's leaking, and we need to get it taken care of. So that's what this money is for, is so that we can. What's going to happen with that landfill is they will be taking all the stuff or what is that's there and putting it on top of a covering so that it will be safer. I mean, in today's world, we would have never put a landfill so near a river or so near the water.
But we didn't necessarily know that, or we looked the other way when it was done years ago.
Well, from what I'm hearing, we have a number of unofficial landfills throughout the Eagan, Burnsville area. So obviously it was done without a lot of coordination. People just, when there was nobody here, they just had the land and they put the stuff there.
Well, there's no question that infrastructure is really important.
Exactly.
I mean, we here in Minnesota, who had a bridge go into the Mississippi River, know more than most, just the dangers of a crumbling infrastructure. And we need it on our streets and our roads, and we need it really in so many areas, so that, yeah, we have to make that a priority this time around.
And to me, obviously I have been trying to make it a priority, as has others. The problem gets into the problem areas where people don't want to fund it. And when I was on the Egan City Council, at that point, MnDOT was like 20 years behind in its programs, because I remember trying to get a road coming over to West Publishing, and there's 7,000 people working there, and MnDOT, they were told by MnDOT that they're not supposed to be there yet. And it did take about 20 years to get the new road put in, and we're still 20 years at least behind. And to me, every time there's a death, you just wonder, if we had spent the money. And during our committee hearings last year, the MnDOT testifiers were adamant in saying that they are not really doing planning for new projects. They are concentrating strictly on maintenance and trying to make intersections work better, because that's all the money they have. So we do need to have funding, and actually I was talking with some engineers recently, and one of the new things that the Republicans put in their budget last year was for a tax on auto parts. But interesting is what seems to be happening is not all the money from that is going towards transportation. So we're still not getting the money to MnDOT that needs to be there.
And transportation, of course, is one of your pets, and you're very involved and have been in transportation. And we've seen a lot of good things happen in transportation in terms of increasing light rail, high-speed bus travel with bus stations being built and all, but there's still a long way to go.
Oh, especially when we've got an aging population. And not to mention that we're planning on more growth in this area. And the younger people in particular are looking for public transit. So we need to concentrate on that.
Now, a neighbor of ours from Egan, a name recently surfaced in terms of the gubernatorial election. A fellow by the name of Tim Pawlenty.
I do know that name, and I do know that person, as a matter of fact.
And that would be an interesting twist, where the Democrats haven't fixed on a candidate as yet. I think he would probably eclipse all the Republicans in the field, although several of them don't seem to feel that way. Could make for a very interesting race at a time when the Republicans control the legislature, maybe the Senate. We're not sure, because we don't know whether Fishback is a senator or a lieutenant governor, but it could make for a very interesting election year in 2018.
Can I go back to the transportation issue? When Tim was first running for governor, in our local paper, his big issue was transportation. He said that the state's transportation system is an embarrassment. And yet in 2008, when we had a good transportation bill, we had to pass that bill over his veto.
Well, actually, in this very forum, Pawlenty and I had a discussion about light rail. This is before the Green Line was built. And he opposed it because he said there wouldn't be enough passengers and it wouldn't justify itself in costs. And I felt just the opposite. And as I've said many times on this show, when it came to cutting the ribbon and taking the first ride, he was there, not me. So there ain't no justice.
And we do know that they have both been very successful.
Getting people out in 2018 is really important. Do you think it's going to be tougher or easier to get people to go to the polls in 2018?
I am hoping it will be easier. I've been really encouraged because we've had, there have been a lot of meetings that have been held since the November election, whether the meetings on health care, just various town hall meetings. The numbers that have been showing up have been huge, especially when they've had to do with CD2 as a whole area. I mean, it's been hundreds of people showing up. And even this past April, when Senator Carlson and I held one on specifically on health care. We had over 100 people show up at Metcalf Junior High, and that's huge. I mean, usually we're lucky if we get like 30 or so people to a town hall meeting, but we did have like 100 people that day.
Speaking of town hall meetings, you have another one coming up. We're sitting here on February the 9th, but you have one coming up with Senator Carlson. When and where?
Okay, it is Saturday, February 17th at 10 o'clock, and it is at the Diamond Head Mall, the 196 Education Center. So it's a new site for us to use, but I know I've attended many meetings recently, so it is a nice facility to use. So, and I think, again, we wanted to make sure we have enough space in case we're lucky enough to have the same type of turnout we had last year.
One of the biggest things facing our society, and particularly a big problem in Dakota County, which surprises me, is the opioid epidemic. What can the legislature do to make things safer and to cut down on the tragic number of deaths because of opioids?
And obviously that's a national thing, and I was listening the other day where they would hope that the president said that was a crisis in this country, but he has given no money towards it. And I think we need to be able to get people help when they need it. And I guess, you know,
I don't think we can count on the feds.
Well, that may be.
Any more than we can count on what the president says today as being consistent with what he'll say a half hour from now. But I think a lot of the onus falls on the state legislature. Now, what can the state legislature do, or what should we do to really cut down on this opioid epidemic?
We do have a process where we do track the drugs that are being sold. That would be one way. The other thing has to, again, to get people access to the care when they need it. And the thing with the opioids that I've heard many times is that people originally go to it because, you know, like maybe they've had some type of accident or something, and they're given this very strong thing. So, you know, I mean, we could definitely put a ban on using some of those things. The other thing that I know I get a number of emails on is where people would like us to expand the use of marijuana, and would people be using that instead of opioids? It's not quite as drastic as some of the pharmaceuticals, but we have a problem with the pharmaceuticals in this country to begin with, and that's the one that
and
really
we can't negotiate with them,
right?
Which is absurd. Yeah, the Veterans Administration can negotiate. Other countries can negotiate on prices, but because of a bill passed,
yeah, and that type of
nationally,
legislation needs to be repealed.
we can't negotiate, and that is absurd and idiotic, and really that's very true. I don't think that opioid users can equate with marijuana users, because one just leaves you kind of mellow, and the other one really is what brings on a high. But then you get into fentanyl, and
right.
people are dead.
And they're so very, very addictive, and that would be the other thing is maybe you could probably legislate that people are made more aware of the damage that can be done, because some of these products are so very, very addictive. And would anybody take it if they realized that once you start using it, if you go past a certain point,
they get so desperate that they can't help
exactly.
themselves, apparently.
Exactly.
And education, obviously, particularly in the schools, has to really, really emphasize it and be more forceful about it. And then beyond that, I think we have to monitor the distribution,
and that,
the legitimate distribution of pills.
And as I said, we do have a system where supposedly that is supposed to be taking place. So say somebody went to a couple of different doctors and got more than they should be happening. We should be able to find that out. But again, from the stories that I've heard, it's just the fact that somebody went there initially, and they were given more than they probably needed. And I remember when I had surgery a while back, I mean, I didn't use half of the pills that I was given. I mean, I just took it for the first couple of days, and that seems to be the trend, is trying to give a very limited amount
As
for
long
dosage.
as you didn't sell the other half.
Exactly. Well, no, I didn't. I didn't. We do have places where you can dispose of drugs now. That's very helpful.
Now, we just had caucuses this week. Both parties had caucuses for legislative positions.
Mm-hmm.
That's February. Now we're coming up, and I guess it's August, where we're going to have primaries. Isn't it surplusage? Isn't it a waste of money? Isn't it unnecessary to have both caucuses and primaries?
And I have heard that argument before. Until I moved to Minnesota, I wasn't aware of caucuses, and I guess I like the opportunity that you have to meet with your neighbors that normally you may not have during the...
That's why you have these library sessions.
Yes.
That's why candidates go door to door.
Well, that's
there
true.
are ways to meet with neighbors, coffees in areas. But to me, it's just a waste of millions of dollars to have to set up and then have a primary on top of it.
And that's, I mean, that is a huge deal, and you're right. And the fact that we have the caucuses on a Tuesday night, which makes it really difficult for many people to attend, so that cuts down on some of the letting people become engaged. So either we need to change how we do the caucuses so more people can come, like maybe have it on a Saturday morning or a Saturday afternoon or something like that. But there are people that just want to do away with the caucus just because people are so busy now and just do not have enough time to do that.
It becomes really a question of favorites. How many of your neighbors can you drag out to support somebody when the vote is meaningless except for publicity purposes, because it's the primary that decides who the candidate will be?
Exactly. And as I said, it's to have both. That is a problem that. But the only, and it does seem like the logical thing to do is to go to the primary.
Now, in the last session, you authored and co-authored 62 bills. I think you authored 3 or 4 bills, and you co-authored, signed on to other bills. What do you have on the agenda coming up in this bonding session?
Well, the county definitely has a couple of main things. One is they are going to want money for a new building. It's going to be a building that's used for training, like for first responders, for law enforcement, and mental health. And it's going to be and their intent is for it to be a regional facility. So they're intending to ask the state for $6 million to put towards that, and the county will be $6 million as well. So that one I definitely think is a really great idea.
And are you drafting a bill to propose that, or how does that work?
There is already one drafted, so I have signed on to that. We met, the legislators met with the county commissioners about a week or so ago, and we had the bill there to talk about it. And that is, that is probably at the top of their list.
And of course, you've already indicated that you support the governor's bonding proposal.
Right.
What else do you see happening?
There may be the main things for Dakota County, as I said, would be that building, and the landfill are the ones that we want most. If we can get some bonding for some of the transportation things, but those are, we're going to try to focus on a few things to make sure that we have all of our efforts.
This session starts when?
February 20th, and then it would go till about May 20th. And depending, I know that there's some people are hoping that we get out early, but it's still going to be a fight over money. And I think last year it was there was some of the budget where they were taking money, reversing some of the money that we were receiving, for instance, from cigarettes, from cigars, and that kind of put us in, looks like it could technically put us into a deficit position. And so I think we need to make sure that that is changed. I mean, we need money for our schools. I mean, the fact that we have to fight for education funding just drives me up a wall in the state, because I know how important education is. But we finally did come up with enough money for the formula. But the other thing that we didn't even really touch last year even was having to do with student debt. And that has the impact on students that want to go further on after they're leaving high school, as well as the people that have graduated. And again, we should be working on that big time, so these people can afford to live the lives and have access to the jobs that they're
Can we afford tuition-free community college?
That one I don't know. I know that at the very least, we should allow people to have 2 years beyond high school, so at least they get certificates or something and are helping. It would be great, and we know that other countries do that. But financially, I think we need to take smaller.
Other countries run circles around us when
exactly,
it comes
and that
to education. When it becomes, we're talking about healthcare. When you're talking about some of the fundamentals, and of course, we do lead in gun deaths. So we're number one in something.
Well, that's not where I think we should be. But that's the point. I mean, what I've tried to tell people is, to me, the role of government is to help our people achieve their optimum, whatever they want. But certainly, shouldn't we be able to make sure that they all have health care access? I mean, that to me should be a no-brainer. How many people can function if they're dealing with certain conditions? And in many times, because people don't have early health care, they end up in much worse scenarios. And autism is another one where we know that if we can get help to these kids early on, they're much more successful. So those are things that we're doing. But what I'm seeing both big time in Congress, but even what I saw recently in our state legislature, is they're trying to get more money to corporations and to the super wealthy, rather than trying to help our population as a whole.
Well, that sounds very familiar on a national level as well. Yeah.
That's what I said. I mean, what they've done is just awful, in my opinion.
I know that you are one of the most popular members of the legislature.
Oh, thank you.
And that you cross the aisle, and that you're able to talk to and work with your peers of the other party. However, sometimes that's meaningless when the head of the other party is really reluctant to go along with even compromises that are proposed. And another criticism of the legislature is the fact that they meet for 3 months, but then we're down to the last 2 days. They haven't passed the important legislation yet. And sometimes we have to go into costly special sessions. What can be done to turn that around? It's so illogical and it's so inappropriate.
What I've been trying to do, particularly for the last year, is to encourage people to really follow what we're doing. I know that I've tried to, I put out email updates, and I try to at least give people some idea of the bills that we're working in so I can get some response. But, and I'll give you an example, like last year for the conference committees, it was so very, very obvious that the committees did not make the final decision. Because I'll say I was in the last transportation meeting, which was like on a Thursday or Friday, and next day I'm hearing that the speaker is saying all the bills are going to be ready by Monday. And I knew there were no committee meetings being scheduled. And actually for transportation, I don't think they had their meeting till Tuesday. But nevertheless, what, as you have already referred to, is what seems to be happening is the decisions are being made at the top. It's not being made in the committees. And that is so very wrong. I mean, it was to watch some of the people that came to testify at our committees, and in some cases, like the preemption bill, we had scores of people that were testifying about the bill, but yet the bill made it, you know, there were really no questions. The bill made it, went out of committee the way it came in. And that's wrong. I mean, at least to me, that you're not taking into consideration the people that have taken the time to come to St. Paul to testify.
Well, that's what we have elections for, and we do have an election coming up in 2018. And perhaps the composition of the two houses in the Minnesota legislature will change. We know that we're getting a new governor, and the constitutional offices are all up.
Exactly.
Secretary of State and auditor, et cetera. So the only thing one can do is to work for that change, I guess.
Well, the other thing I'm telling people is, like, when they contact me, I suggest that they also copy the speaker. They also do the majority leader in the Senate. I mean, we need to be putting pressure on the leadership because they are the ones that are making it so difficult for us to act as a body.
And exerting an untoward amount of control over people who were elected to do things and who want to do things, and yet really have to fall into lockstep with what's proposed from the top, which is manifestly unfair.
And there are times when I'm meeting with people where they said, well, you need to talk to people across the aisle. And what I tell them is, I do. And I know that these reps have the same problems I do. So it's not the fact that their districts are so different. It's the fact that they are, and again, I'm talking about the majority party right now, they put so much pressure on their people to just vote with the leadership. And until we're able to change that.
And threaten them with primaries if they don't, as we have seen a couple of years ago in the Republican Party here. 7 people crossed the aisle, 7 people were primaried. There's something wrong when you can't vote your conscience.
Exactly.
We've been talking with Representative Sandy Masin, District 51A, seeking her 6th term. And Sandy, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you, Alan.